We're recording now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll call the meeting to order. Just because we have issues with the screen, I'm actually going to have Gina do a roll call of council members. Because we have some staff and we have some guests on, I don't see all of the screens. For some reason, the gallery view on here is not the same as the Brady Bunch gallery view that people are used to. So Gina will just do a roll call so that we know who's present, who's not.
Councillor Elliott?
Present.
Councillor Vic? Councillor Vic? He's there, he's just muted.
Sorry. Yep, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Paul?
I'm here.
Councillor Rudenberg? Councillor Rudenberg?
Okay. Is she on? Do you know?
Yeah, she's there. Says she is, but she's just muted.
Okay, Councillor Rudenberg, we have you as muted. Could you unmute and verify your presence, please?
Yeah, I'll move on. Councillor
Okay.
Runge?
Here.
Councillor Goulet?
Present.
And Councillor Rudenberg?
Present.
Thank
Sorry.
you.
Okay. Okay, just as we learn this technology before we get into the substance of our meeting, and again, because of, it's very hard to chair this meeting when my obligation and responsibility is to council members. And because of the screen configuration we've got, I won't always be able to see you. So there's a couple of things, and I would like you all to test it to see if you can see where your hands up button is. There's a button there where you can put your hand up, and if you find it, put your hand up.
Lorianne.
Okay, so Councillor Rudenberg, okay, we've got Councillor Lindsay, I saw yours pop up. Martin. Okay, so could we have, who's on an iPad that put their hand up already? So Scott, could you just verbalize where you're finding that for us, please?
Yeah, up on the top right-hand corner, there's 3 dots and it says more. When you tap the 3 dots, down comes a screen. Second from the bottom is raise hand or lower hand. I'm raising my hand right now.
So Councillor Paul, you have found it?
I'm sorry. Yes, I did, and I hit raised hand.
Yeah,
don't know if
I
you-
saw it.
Okay,
Yeah, we
thank you.
saw it. That's what I'm saying. You found it there. So I believe everybody's found it. So I'm going to ask Director Bolton just to keep an eye on that for me because I won't necessarily be able to see that. The other pieces, please, if you are not speaking, please make sure you do mute. The other piece that I've certainly learned from using this technology, if for some reason you're going to do a major adjustment to your screen, or you're going to vacate your space, or you're going to do something that causes a lot of visual disruption, turn your video off first, please, and then turn it back on again when you're settled down. From our side, if you happen to grab the screen during that period of time, it's very disconcerting when you've got, you know, hands in the way and weird images occurring and all of that stuff. So please just get in the habit. Feel free to turn your video on and off so that we're just getting a seamless image, okay? And then the other piece, and it happened with the Finance Committee piece, please do not come into meetings late. I'm sorry, but the Zoom technology is a little bit hit and miss. Today we lucked out, even though 3 members of council came in late, we lucked out that they actually came in, but because they came in unmuted, it actually interrupted the presentation on our end, captured the screen, caused us to have to pause the deliberations and then get back onto deliberations again. But there are circumstances where trying to get on causes a pretty significant disruption, and we had an attempted meeting with the Seniors Council today where it took us 15 minutes just to get the meeting started. So if you can't make the start of a meeting and come in a couple of minutes early, I'm going to have to ask you for committee meetings. Please either get in on time or I don't think we can accommodate you coming in. We can try if you mute and if you do all that stuff and come in, but if there's any issues with you coming in, stop and bug out of the meeting because it's way too disruptive, okay? And then the final point again, for in-camera meetings, we have our other set of rules around that about headphones and everything else. But I think you'll find as you use this technology, headphones and speakers are preferred because even when you're speaking, it negates the background noise. It makes the sound on our end a lot cleaner than otherwise, okay? Are there any questions about just process using this technology? Questions or comments? Okay. For those of you who have your hands up, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Paul, Councillor Vic, and Councillor Goulet, you can put your hands down now. And I did note that Councillor Vic gave us a thumbs up at one point, and so there is another emoji there that gives thumbs up. So, you know, if we do something right at one time during this meeting, feel free to give a thumbs up. Otherwise, let's proceed, okay?
Don't send hearts though.
Yeah, no hearts. We do recognize that we meet on the traditional territory of the LHTAKO DENE Nation. With respect to the agenda, you have a mislabeled late agenda item. It's labeled F1. It's actually I1, and it's just the report for the FSAC meeting. And then we do have a late correspondence item M1 with respect to Billy Barker Days that we'll get there. When we get to the bylaw, our council procedure bylaw, I'm going to ask Ms. Albers to just give us a quick update. There was a bit of a glitch there on public notice, and so Ms. Albers will speak to that before we take the vote on that one. And I believe that's it. Okay, so with that, can I have a motion to approve the agenda? You can just do it, yeah. Councillor Paul, I see, and Councillor Vic. Okay. And what we're going to do is change the procedure, and we did this down at the CRD. It worked effectively. I see Councillor Elliott choosing the thumbs up, which is one way because we're a small group. We could start doing that. But the other way is I will only call for opposition vote. So I will call for the negative vote when we get into the voting. And again, that is not a speech. That is just a nay vote if we do call it that way. So anyone in opposition to the approval of the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move into the presentations there. Corey, if you could just say a few words first so that you come on our main screen.
Okay, how's that?
Good, and then everybody else should be muted. And this is where because Corey's got a presentation where he'll pause and potentially ask if there's questions. Because I cannot now see all of the council members on my screen, I do need you to use your hands up, and Director Bolton will watch for your hand going up. Okay, so I'll turn the Oh, sorry, I skipped over the minutes. I was so excited to get to Corey's presentation, unlike the city manager. So can I have adoption of the special electronic council meeting? Councillor Rudenberg and Councillor Goulet. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that's passed. And now over to you, Corey.
Great. Thanks for having me here virtually. And again, just reiterating my thanks to Carrie and the team at the city for another easy audit and a little bit different presentation here. But this one is quite a bit shorter, Byron, so you can hang in there.
Thumbs up.
I'm going to go through the whole presentation and just take questions at the end because I think that'll probably work the best.
That's great.
Okay, so taking us through this PowerPoint presentation, it's got City of Quesnel financial statement presentation April 21st on it. So flipping to the first slide, just the agenda has the audit report. We'll talk about that, some of the results from the financial statements, and then just some discussion around surplus and reserves at the end of the year. So flipping on to page 3, so we've got the independent auditors report. So it is in draft at this point. So we issue our audit report after the financial statements have been approved. At this point, we do anticipate issuing a clean audit report. So for Mayor and Council, that's what you want to hear from your auditors. The financial statements are in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards in all material respects, in our opinion. So that's kind of the main report that we provide, and clean audit report is what you want to hear. So moving on to page 4, we get into the results. So the financial assets as of December 31st, 2019. So the total financial assets were $27.4 million compared to $26.4 million in the previous year. So this represents a $1 million increase year over year and is largely reflected in that cash balance. And we'll see just how that kind of cash balance changed later on through generation of surplus in the year. So flipping to the next page, on page 5, we have the financial liabilities. So the total financial liabilities is the second to last number. And you can see that the total financial liabilities are $15.3 million, an increase from $13 million in the previous year. This represents a $2.2 million increase year over year. And that increase is reflected in a $1.3 million increase in the landfill liability, which is an estimate for the closure costs of the landfill, the City of Quesnel's portion of those closure costs. The increase is also reflected in a $500,000 increase in deferred revenue, which is revenue that's been received for programs that are yet to be delivered and will be delivered in future years. There's also a $400,000 increase in the municipal debt from $5.2 million from 4.7 in the previous year. So when you take those total financial assets less the total financial liabilities, you end up with net financial assets of $12.1 million at the end of December 31st, 2019. When we flip to the next page, on page 6, we see the non-financial assets of the city. So the non-financial assets are those assets such as tangible capital assets that are not generally turned into cash or settled by way of cash. So the tangible capital assets are $99.1 million at the end of the year compared to $96.6 million, largely reflected in an increase in the tangible capital asset balance, which is offset by the depreciation expense of those tangible capital assets. So you can see that balance has gone from $96.2 million to $98.4 million at the end of December 2019. We'll get into more details on the capital assets on the next page. So starting on page 7, you can see a breakdown of the tangible capital assets. So you can see the main increases during the year reflected in land improvements, which increased by $320,000, which was the result of some playground equipment that was purchased. There's an increase of $720,000 in the machinery and equipment, which is a result of loader, grader, and compactor purchases during the year. There is an increase in the motor vehicles category, which is related on the next page, sorry. There's an increase in the motor vehicles category related to purchase of fire truck and a sand truck. And then there's an increase in the construction in progress category, which really relates to the new public works yard, which is currently in progress and not being amortized. Some of the other decreases that you would see would be a result of the amortization or depreciation expense that's charged against the capital assets each and every year. So that's a breakdown of the tangible capital assets. When we flip over to the next page, we see the operations. So this is the activity for the year ended December 31st, 2019. So on the first column, you've got the budgeted numbers. In the middle is the operations and the actual results for 2019. And on the right, you can see the actual results for 2018. So you can see the revenues for 2019 were higher than 2018, from 28.8 million to 29.6 million in 2019, but lower than budget, and lower than the budget of 31.8 million, largely due to the fact that there was budgeted revenue from grants expected for capital projects related to the 2-mile flat water main project. The expenses for the year were $28.4 million for 2019, on a budget of $26.8 million and a comparable year in the prior year of $25.5 million. And the majority of the increase from budget in the expense line items is due to a change in the estimate related to the landfill. So we would have seen that increase in the landfill liability, which was on the previous page. And that really is reflected in the expenses for the year, and that's what's causing the increase there. A small gain on some of the disposals of tangible capital assets of $71,000 brings the total surplus for the year to $1.2 million. Flipping on to the next page just puts the revenues into a graphical presentation. And you can see really the makeup of the revenues has stayed fairly consistent year over year, and really has stayed fairly consistent between that $25 and $30 million range, with the majority of the revenue coming from net taxation and grants. On the next page, we can see the expenses by function. So this is again in graphical presentation. You can see the expenses by function. Sorry about this. You can see the expenses by function, and you'll really note that the main increase here you can see is reflected in that solid waste and management function, which is a result due to the change in the estimate for the landfill liability. So that's that teal bar that's right in the middle. And you can see really the breakdown between the various functions is fairly consistent year over year, with that being kind of the bar that's seen the largest increase. When we look at the expenses by object, so function is obviously the different functions, object is the different types of expenses. So again, you can see, a fairly even distribution with the main categories of expenses being from goods and services, salary and wages being the purple bar, the RCMP contractors, and then the cost of capital being the darkest blue bar, which is really related to the amortization expense. Flipping on to the next page, we see the change in the net financial assets. So this is a reflection of the financial assets that are available in terms of cash less financial liabilities that need to be discharged with cash. So we started the year with $13.3 million in financial assets. There was a surplus that was experienced of $1.2 million, which was previously presented. And then the net change in non-financial assets. So this was the investment that was made from financial assets into capital assets, which are non-financial, of $2.4 million. So that leaves closing net financial assets of $12.1 million, which is a decrease from the previous year of $13.3 million. When we look at the statement of remeasurement gains, this is a new statement. I'm not going to take too much time on it. This really just tracks the difference between the fair market value and the cost base of the investment portfolio that the city holds. This doesn't relate to the actual return on the investments. It's just intended to take some of the investment income volatility out of the statement of operations and to hold it on its own statement called the statement of remeasurement gains. So when we look at the balances in the accumulated surplus as of December 31st, 2019, you can see the operating fund, which is the fund held for the operations of the city, has decreased from $4.6 million to $2.3 million. You can see the statement of remeasurement holds an unrealized loss of $200,000. The statutory reserves that are held by the city have increased from 14.1 to $15.9 million, and we'll see a breakdown of that. And then the equity that's held in the tangible capital assets that we reviewed is $93.1 million, which really reflects the tangible capital asset values at their depreciated cost, less the debt that's held on those assets. So that's really what makes up that accumulated surplus of $111 million. So although $111 million may seem like a large accumulated surplus, you can see that the amount available for operations is quite a bit smaller than that at 2.3. When we flip to the next page, you can see a breakdown of the reserves. So I won't go into any detail about what the changes in these reserves are, just presented for your information that the capital reinvestment down to the sewer reserves have changed year over year as allocations are made to those reserves or money is spent out of those reserves. And that reserve breakdown is continued onto the page 17 of the presentation, which shows just how exactly we come up to the total statutory reserves of $15.9 million at the end of the year. Within the notes to the consolidated financial statements, so they've just provided a long list. When you do read the financial statements, they are about 28 pages and they take me a little longer to go through than this presentation. One new note that I just bring to your attention. So we did disclose a subsequent event related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and just that the city is, doing an analysis of the impact that we'll have, and no estimation has been made within this financial statements as to the impact that COVID-19 will have on the city's operations. With that, I'll take any questions on the financial statements.
Any questions from council? No hands are going up. And most of council were already on the finance committee meeting where we went in quite a bit more depth into this. So it's not that there's no questions, it's just that we had a previous more in-depth meeting for that. Okay, so not seeing any questions, Corey, I want to thank you and your team. I know that as much as you have indicated your pleasure in working with our team, I know our team really appreciates the folks that come down here and work with us. And of course, some of us here are not part of the team, but we get sucked in when we have to do the interviews. And I actually got most of my answers right this time, apparently. Ben was quite excited about how I was answering the questions. So anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And we'll deal with the financial statements under my finance committee report. So thanks, Corey.
Thank you.
Great, thank you a lot for having me. Have a good night.
Thanks, Corey.
Go take care of that boy back there that's looking for your attention.
Yeah, I know. Can't win.
Yeah, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Now, do we have the folks from SPARC on?
Sarah.
Okay, Sarah, if you could speak now so that you can take over our main screen.
Hello.
I have to... Okay, and you're on by phone, Sarah?
No,
Oh, there we go. Super. Hi, and welcome. So if you could introduce yourself, and then council does have the report and has had an opportunity to look at the report. How would you like us to deal with questions? Would you like to pause at certain points and take questions, or just finish the presentation and then do questions?
I think waiting till the end would work best.
Okay, that's super. We'll take it that way. So the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I believe on the agenda, it's page 57 is where the presentation starts. But first I'll introduce myself. My name is Sarah Hubert. I am a researcher at the Social Planning and Research Council of BC, located in the Lower Mainland. And I just want to thank you so much for having me here today. It's really been a pleasure working with the City of Quesnel, the North Cariboo Regional District, and especially with Amy and Lindsay, who I see are on the call. So they've helped a lot with this as well. So thank you for your support, and I look forward to sharing with you what we have to present today. So just drawing your attention to the, I believe, on page 59. So I'll go over a little bit of an outline. What I'll do today is I'll do an overview of the work plan, and then go into a little bit about the responsibility of childcare in BC. Then I'll talk more about what we know of Quesnel families and childcare in Quesnel. I'll do some discussion around recommended targets, and then I'll do a brief overview of some of the strategic directions and some of the action items in the report. And those are around increasing accessibility, improving affordability, and focusing on quality. And then I'll have closing remarks, and we'll have a chance for some questions. So on page 60 of the agenda, this is the work plan, and phase 1 consisted of a needs analysis report, and this was to serve as the evidence base for the decision making, and data was collected through many different forms, such as the Union of BC Municipalities inventory from Northern Health, as well from the city, from StatsCam. And as part of the needs analysis, we did do 2 surveys, and one was with childcare operators, where we had 35 responses, and the other was with the parent and guardians, where we had 217 responses. And we also did a review of some zoning bylaw regulations and relevant policies. And the next page on 61. This phase 2 consisted of community engagement work, which included 2 meetings with the early years table and a focus group with childcare providers. And the purpose of this community engagement work was to help us validate and verify the findings of the surveys and make sure we were on the right page and on the right track. And then phase 3 is where we are today, which is the childcare action plan and the space creation plan. And so next, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the municipal role, and just want to make sure to provide some context for the action items that we gave. So on page 63, this just briefly explains childcare in BC. And in BC, the system is really complex, as I'm sure you know. It involves 3 ministries, including MCFD, health, and education. And they all have different responsibilities and different roles, which include some things such as legislation, policy regulations, funding, capital grants, etc. But the province has committed to building a universal publicly funded childcare system around these 3 strategic directions. So the affordability, accessibility, and quality, which is why we chose to align the strategic directions of the city with those as well, to align with where the province is going. And the province has a 10-year plan, which includes $1.3 billion in the first 3 years. So although the province does play that primary role in advancing childcare, the childcare services are delivered at a community level. So therefore, municipalities do have a critical role to play in fostering that system that provides quality care. So the next page. And even though under provincial legislation, there is not an assigned role for childcare, there is the choice to have a childcare plan. And municipalities and regional districts are closest to the people and have generally the most in-depth understanding of the local context, which is why it's important to have that municipality support. And there's many different roles that a municipality can play, such as planning for childcare, reviewing the bylaws, ensuring policies to make childcare a priority, and doing partnerships with schools, health authorities, community organizations, etc. I'm going to go into a little bit more about what we know about families in Quesnel. So starting on page 66, there's some stats around the child population. And our statistics are from 2016, as that is when the last census was completed. And in 2016, 44% of 0 to 12-year-olds in the Quesnel census agglomeration, so that's the Quesnel area, were in the city of Quesnel. And in 2016, about 63% of all children in the agglomeration were school-aged. Just some notes around the population projections. So between 2011 and 2016, the number of children did decrease by 140. And there is a projected decrease by 2029 of 251 children. But what I did want to note, as we had lots of conversations around this, is that this doesn't reflect what the schools are experiencing, and that although there's the projected decrease, the school district believes there will be more children, or if not the same amount of children, based on what they're experiencing at schools. And also we know that Quesnel is targeting for young families to move into the region, which will also bring in more young children who need childcare. And the next slide is just the map that shows the population distribution, as well as the purple dots are the location of childcare in the city and the region. We also looked at child vulnerabilities, and we used the Human Early Learning Partnership, or HELP, which is an organization through UBC that measures the level of vulnerability of kindergarten students across BC. And what this data showed is that the percentage of vulnerable kindergarten students is increasing in the Quesnel School District. It was 38% in 2016, and the latest data just came out in 2019, was at 40%. Also, the number of special needs, or children with special needs in elementary schools, is increasing. Presently, in 2018-2019, there was 163, when previously in 2015, there was 116. And also, it's important to note that over 1 in 5 children are living in poverty, and approximately 1 in 4 children are in lone parent families. Moving on to the parent survey key findings. So 217 responses, which is a really great response rate. Big cities sometimes struggle to get that many, so it was wonderful to see that engagement. And we asked them questions around their needs, their childcare schedules, their locations of preference, really broad level of questions. So these are just very few highlights. But what we did note is that 57% of respondents find the fees that they pay, so over half, are unsustainable for their family. Almost 8 in 10 respondents find that there's an inadequate supply of childcare in the city. And the reason why people need childcare is so that they can go to work. And also, almost 1 in 4 parents indicate that their youngest child is on a wait list. So that's 25% on a wait list for childcare. Moving on to the the provider survey key findings. And again, we had 35 responses for 31 facilities. So basically every facility filled in a response. And the reason why there's more is that some people answered for their facility more than once, or some respondents were coordinated for more than one facility. And the key findings here was that over 1/3 of respondents want to expand their current facility within the next 2 years. That's really good news that people have expansion on the brain. Also, the other key findings is that childcare staffing challenges are huge. There's a limited supply of applicants. There's difficult finding access to quality education, qualified staff, limited opportunities for pay. The wages are low. And also, only 2 programs are open on Saturdays or Sundays out of all the programs, which is not that many. And the city, what they recommend to the city is, when they are asked, is just to highlight the staffing crisis, was what they said, that there's just not enough qualified staff to fill the work. The next slide is on childcare spaces. So this chart demonstrates the number of spaces per 100 children in Quesnel, in the North and the North Cariboo Regional District, broken out per the different types of childcare. So the first is group, which is group childcare for birth to 36 months, which is 0 to 2-year-olds or infant toddlers. And there is 5.7 spaces per 100 children. And then the next one, there is 20 spaces per 100 children for group 30 months to school age. So that's 3 to 4 to 5, which is pretty typical across all the childcare plans that we're doing. That group tends to have the most number of spaces per 100 children. And then for school age children, there's only 4.9 spaces per 100. But then when you take into consideration all the other spaces, so that's family childcare, multi-age childcare, etc., there's 15.1 spaces per 100. And what does that mean compared to everyone else? So the BC average is 18.4 spaces per 100 children, and the Canadian average is 27.2 spaces per 100 children. I hear some reaction there. Yeah, so it's important to note with the Canadian one that does take into consideration, or does take into account Quebec, which has a universal childcare system, and their average space, or what they aim for, is about 50 spaces per 100 children. So it does skew it a little bit, but compared to, there are other provinces that are higher. Okay, so talking more about some actions and some recommendations, we're going to move into the childcare space targets, and what does this mean? So what we suggest, I just mentioned, the BC average ratio of childcare spaces is 18.4. And although there is a projected decrease population in the city of Quesnel, the city will still need to increase its childcare spaces even to reach the BC average. And so through our calculations, in order to meet the BC average in 5 years, 86 additional spaces will need to be added in the Quesnel School District served area. And so with 86 new childcare spaces required over the next 5 years to meet that BC average of 18.4, there will need to be spaces across all age categories, but we suggest that focus on the infant toddler and school age, since they're so much lower than the 3 to 5 year olds. And it will be possible to meet this, we believe, because in the 2019 budget, the provincial government promised $237 million over the next 3 years to support the creation of 22,000 new spaces. So there is that opportunity to access some of that funds in Quesnel in the coming years. And as I mentioned earlier, over 1/3 of the providers want to expand. So there's potential to leverage that and work with the provincial government and apply for some capital funding to assist with facility maintenance costs and to move unlicensed spaces into licensed spaces and help with that expenses. And next I'll talk more about some of the action items and the strategic directions. And they're across the 3 areas, as I mentioned: accessibility, affordability, and quality. And in total, there are 27 action items, but I'll only be talking about a couple that came forward the most, or were the most prominent in our research. And I did want to say that when in taking consideration these recommended action items, it's really important to note that the municipalities that we've been working with, and Quesnel as well, have limited resources to advance these social services such as childcare. And municipalities, although you can play a really important role in things such as convening groups, engagement, social planning, working with other partners, building relationships, we did in the action plan provide partners that could also be involved in the work with the municipality, so that the municipality does not hold the sole responsibility for implementing the action items. So the first is around accessibility, and this is just on page 76. And accessibility means also, it means so that everyone who wants to afford or want to access childcare can access childcare. And first, the highest need in terms of accessibility is with infant, toddlers, and school-age children. And so therefore, we recommend, it's recommendation 1.2 on page 20 of the report, is to focus on that infant toddler when increasing childcare spaces. And this can be accomplished by establishing incentive opportunities for family childcare centers to open and operate infant toddler childcare. And the other issue for access is that we found part-time shift workers and those who work weekends struggle to find care. And this was evident as 20% of survey respondents noted that. So therefore, we recommend to increase evening and weekend programming in the city of Quesnel, particularly on Saturdays. And this can be done with partnering with businesses and organizations such as hospitals to explore childcare solutions for shift workers. And finally, only one public elementary school has childcare, which means there's lots of opportunities, but currently this limits options for families. So therefore, we recommend forming a dedicated partnership with the school district to explore the option of co-locating childcare programs in 5 elementary schools in the city, as school age was the most underserved. Moving into improving affordability. And in order to do this, the high costs of childcare need to be addressed. Childcare is expensive, and especially for those with infant toddlers or more than one child. And so we recommend that the city help facilitate the process for childcare providers to apply for the BC Childcare Reduction Initiative and other programs that would assist childcare providers in charging lower fees. And this is something that we identified that the Community Development Coordinator could help with. And another issue is that single parents and families with children with extra support needs struggle to find childcare that they can afford. And so we suggest that the Early Years Table continue to work with the Coalition of Childcare Advocates of BC and advocate for that universal childcare system, which we know the province is going towards. And also that the city applies for the UBCM Childcare Space Creation Grant to create more spaces. And the final strategic direction is on focusing on quality. So the research suggests that it's really important to have outdoor space at childcare facilities. And childcare operators identified that it's difficult for them to find buildings or facilities that has that quality outdoor space. But the city has lots of land that could possibly be used. So therefore, we suggested that the city develops an inventory of publicly owned buildings, land, and parks that may be able to be used to house or build childcare programs and determine whether that rent or lease can be subsidized. Also, childcare operators identified that finding suitable space is tough. So the city should focus on developing partnerships that allow for increase in publicly funded childcare spaces. And the last one, but not least, throughout the project, as I mentioned, it became quite clear that the most pressing and difficult challenge is the limited supply of childcare staff. So there's been several recommendations in the report trying to address that complicated issue. So they include from 3.5 to 3.8, 3.9, and 3.10 in the recommendations, and they are to help identify training opportunities, explore opportunities to make ECE employment more accessible and affordable in the city, collaborating with licensing to continue to provide that information for folks who are interested in starting up their own childcare, and also partnering with the school district to establish ECE programs in high schools. So page 79 is just a summary of the highlights of the recommendations. And I'll move us on to page 80 in the agenda, which is around implementation and monitoring, which is really important because the City of Quesnel and the partners need to take this coordinated approach to advance these recommendations. As we noted in the plan, the region is quite large and dispersed, and there's multiple government bodies. But it's really, everyone really relies heavily on the City of Quesnel for the childcare needs. So considering all these challenges, it's difficult to imagine the government taking it on independently. So there's that need for those partners and businesses to work together. And it's essential to be effective and to put this plan into action. So basically our final recommendation is that the North Cariboo Early Years Table expand its mandate to share and obtain buy-in for this action plan, invite additional community partners to the table, continue to exchange information, collaborate on joint initiatives, collect and evaluate data, pursue continuous improvement by implementing the initiatives in response to the data, and also preparing annual reports on childcare services in the region. So that concludes the presentation, and I just want to say that improving childcare services in the region, it seems difficult and it won't be easy, but it is definitely doable. And with these concerted and coordinated efforts, I think that the city is well poised to achieve the childcare goals that you have, and it will benefit the whole community. So thank you very much. I just talked a whole bunch, so I want to open it up to questions.
Thank you. And for council members, just for clarity, the questions in the delegation would be just technical aspects of the report, findings in the survey, etc. With respect to what do we do next, there is a staff report where we can deal with what are our next steps. So we'll open the floor for questions just basically on the presentation itself or any of the details in the report. And again, you can just flag with a hand up, or those you can see. Okay, I can see Councillor Paul. Go ahead, Councillor Paul, unmute.
Unmuted. Thank you, Sarah. Before I ask my question, I just want to say that when I started working for the city, I think it was a town then, back in the 70s and 80s, we were very interactive with SPARC then, and it's good to see that you're still going strong.
Yeah, thank you.
Just a question, and I don't know if the mayor was sort of alluding to not bringing this into the discussion, but if you had to write, or if SPARC had to prepare this report, say 6 months or a year post-COVID, do you see that the report would change a lot?
Councillor Paul, that's a really good question. To be honest, I don't know if I have an answer for you. I don't think it's so hard to know what's going to happen day by day that it's difficult to provide an answer to that question. I imagine that there may be some differences, and definitely I think something that may affect things. Just, you know, we're living in this different reality right now. But based on the information that we have, that the funds are still there from the province, and these are the people's responses. And I think it's become even more clear how important childcare is, especially for folks who are essential workers. So, but yeah, I don't know if I can give a concrete answer to that, sorry.
Thank you. Just further to that, I mean, today on the news, we saw that the school, how we school, is probably going to change to the extent we may end up with staggered school days or working school weekends, etc. And also the working from home is certainly going to have an effect on that. So I look forward to hearing more on that. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Okay, so with the electronic hands up, I have Councillor Vic, Councillor Rudenberg. Just by happenstance, Councillor Runge, you happen to be on our screen. So I did see you physically put your hand up, but I can't see all of council, so you can't rely on me seeing that, but I do have you on my list. So Councillor Vic, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Sarah. Very informative. And I've got a couple of questions from your presentation. You spoke of a need to incentivize, or there may be incentives to increase our infant toddler contingent. What sort of incentives were you alluding to?
Well, it depends. There's different ways in the bylaws that can be addressed. I know we talked about, I'm just going to pull up the report so I can have the recommendations in front of me here. We did talk about working with the Northern, escaping my name, Amy, maybe if you want to jump in, the Northern Trust? Northern
NDI, yeah.
Yeah, and having maybe some incentives through there, or things such as limited or lowering taxes for organizations that are offering infant toddler care. So there's different ways through policies that can be achieved, which we do have outlined in the report. I just want to make sure I say the right ones. Yeah, so those ones basically through bylaws or through different funding opportunities.
Okay.
That things can
and
be.
Then,
Mm-hmm.
All right. And the second question is, you made reference to a UBCM grant for space creation.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't know. How robust is that? What's the aim of that grant?
Yeah, so there is a funding, I don't know if it's still open, but it was, I think they've extended it to July to apply for financial support to create spaces. It's pretty robust, and they are wanting more municipalities to apply. And we are in the middle of working with them to put out basically a guide for municipalities on building childcare. So it's something that they're definitely prioritizing. And
yeah. So Councillor Vic, that's the one that will fund the capital build. And municipalities are eligible entities. And the last change that they made, First Nations also became eligible entities. And I believe there's two streams, one that is a kind of a continuous entry, and then there's another one that was that had an end date to it. And it is for us to build. We would have to commit to owning and ensuring that a childcare facility was operated out of the building. So the municipality would have to own the building and then ensure that for 15 years, it would only be used for childcare facilities. So it's a pretty robust program. The problem with the program, as we'll get into when Amy speaks to it, is that there's an issue with the upfront costs associated with actually doing the capital plan and getting to the point where you would actually have bid documents, which you need for application into the fund, isn't front-end loaded. Only the assessment that we're seeing in front of us now. So we've been having some dialogue with the government, both at UBCM when we met with the minister, and subsequent, I just talked to her about 3 weeks ago about trying to get a fix for that, but we'll deal with that in Amy's report.
If I could
Thank
jump
you.
in, this is me. The UBCM one is currently not open, I don't believe. And the province has switched from a rolling application to 2 intakes. So there's an intake open now until May, and then another one that'll open and be open until November. Okay,
thank you for that clarification. It's a bit of a changing field as they figure out what's going on too, because they did top up the funds. The funds were, I would consider, nominal, and now they've made them a bit more reasonable relative to building costs. So.
Yeah, so what I was fishing for in those questions is it seems like there's some tools that we can obviously utilize to pursue this. It seems to me that if we're below the provincial average and we're a community seeking people to join us in our community, this is a fundamental statistic that we have to get in line here with. So I certainly support any effort to rectify that.
Yeah, and again, we can deal with next steps in Amy's report, but I would put one caveat with Sarah on the in the meeting just now, and maybe Sarah, you could speak to it because it's pertinent. I think a lot of the current childcare operators warned us that building new spaces is not the silver bullet, because if you can't staff that new capacity, you're actually potentially just going to rob staff from already tapped out facilities. So that's why that piece on staff is highlighted so strongly in here. We would have to have a parallel process, but maybe Sarah, you could speak to the veracity of that statement.
Yeah, I think you've got it right. Is if there's spaces but no one to operate the childcare, you're at the same spot. So I think it's important to definitely address the staff shortage in conjunction with building more spaces. Okay,
Councillor Rudenberg.
Thank you. That is such an important piece, is around the staffing. Time and time again, when I go to these meetings, that is the biggest issue. And it's about how much time is needed to actually get especially for the lower age group, how much time it takes to become certified versus time on the ground, not getting paid while you're doing your kind of internship. There's all those really nuances in there. And then it's just about the low wages, right, for daycare providers. And how do you subsidize yourself as a daycare provider? I mean, and you've probably heard this from them, Sarah. How working multiple jobs or trying to work daycare plus some other job because daycare doesn't pay all the bills. Did they have any comments about those kinds of barriers when it comes to getting new trained people?
Just to make sure, is a little bit hard to hear, but what I'm understanding you ask is was there comments from providers around their experiences with low wages, and if we heard that? Yeah, definitely. That's something that we heard, is that it's a challenge. And for one example I can think of is someone went to school and worked, and they're getting paid a wage, but then for them to put their child in childcare and to go work at a childcare center, they would be losing money, and it wouldn't make sense. So things like that happening all the time, that it just doesn't really, it's not, there's this, logically for some folks, it doesn't make ends meet, doesn't make sense to work in childcare. And I know that the province is trying to address that by having wage subsidies, by increasing them by $1 an hour. I think they did that last year, and they're doing it again, and trying to have education opportunities, education bursaries. But what we've heard is that it's not enough that's happening, and there needs to be more at the provincial level.
Right. And I'm sorry about that, not hearing. My headset is.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
Mayor, I don't know whether this was part of the conversation or not, is around how careful do we have to be as not to be seen undermining private daycare if we decide to go down this path? Is that something we can talk about later?
Yeah, so we can deal with that in the implications and implementation piece. But Councillor Rudenberg, whatever's going on with your microphone, you do sound like you're talking to us from Mars. So I don't know if other people can hear you as well. Just as long as you're conscious of that for this meeting. And if Councillor Vic and Councillor Rudenberg, unless you've got one to continue on a perpetual cycle on the speakers list, if you could also just put your hands down as well. Councillor Runge, go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, Sarah, for the report. My question is actually relative to, refers to page 72 of the agenda there, with regards to the numbers. And I guess I've got a couple questions. If we were to take Quebec out of the Canada statistic, where would Canada's statistic fall?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have that number. We just have the Canadian cumulative number. But there are reports available if that's of interest to you. I don't know when the most recent numbers are that has it broken down per province. And BC, from what I remember, is kind of in the middle of the pack compared to other provinces. So not.
So thank you. Yeah, that was going to be the second question, where BC falls. And with regards to spaces, I noticed in one of the reports, I think it was from the Quesnel Daycare Society there, that given the chance, they'd be able to crank up their spaces in their building, but they need staffing. So once again, it goes back to staffing. So for me, do we have any numbers of, if we allowed the private sector to just be staffed fully, would we still be, would another building be required, or would it be already housed here, and then it becomes just a staffing shortage, I guess? And it alluded a little bit, I guess, to whatever was said before there from both the previous two speakers.
Right. So if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying because there's some places that aren't operating at capacity. Is that right, what you're getting at? And if they were at capacity, would there be enough spaces? Is that right?
Or would we be over the provincial average, right?
Right. The space numbers that we've taken into consideration are the capacity numbers. So they're that's what the inventory, the UBCM inventory that was required to be filled out as part of this project. It takes into consideration all of the numbers. So these are, I guess, technically the capacity numbers.
Thank you.
Okay. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Great presentation. Thank you very much. One of the comments that was made in this presentation is, and this is similar to Councillor Runge's question, is over 1/3 of the respondents plan to expand their current facility within the next 2 years. So that 1/3 of the respondents, then, my understanding from your earlier comments was that there were 31 providers in town. So that's 10 of the providers, or 11, because over 1/3, would like to expand. That would be a tremendously interesting group to pull together and say, okay, what are the impediments to expansion? and try to key on that, because it seems to be, we have the interest there. It's private sector interest, which is the kind of the ultimate. And yet, and so what can the city do to help those specific folks, or if there's commonalities anyways? Do you, as part of your survey, do you have more detailed information from those who want to expand about what their current needs are? Is there more that you can share with us to help to facilitate that?
I think that would be, since there are, 30 operators, definitely something to explore in more detail. We did ask a few questions in the survey and in the needs analysis around what are the barriers, and prominently it's around staffing. But there are, of course, other barriers as well. But that was the main theme. So I don't have a specific answer around those 10 facilities, but definitely I think it's something that could be looked into, and how that support, or what that would look like for them. Sorry,
Okay, I don't see any other, thank you, sir. I don't see any other hands up. A couple of questions for me, and a couple of things for council to sort of keep in the back of their mind. The QJS announcement, it's supposed to have some kind of childcare facility embedded in that new facility. That's not reflected in the report, is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, this is just current spaces.
Okay, thank you. So there is something that school districts are working on, and I know the school district would be potentially eligible for things like enhanced Strong Start, whatever the province ends up deciding as their delivery model. I think it's important for council to keep in mind, though, that this sort of suggestion that this is a private versus public situation is not accurate. We are simply being offered the opportunity to capitalize a new building. Mm-hmm. That's all. And so if we've got a facility, for example, that could do an expansion, an existing operator that could do an expansion, I know when I've had some preliminary conversations, we have some childcare delivery in facilities that may not be the best facilities, etc. So there would have to be an expansion of spaces, but it doesn't preclude a partnership as well to be able to give an expanded space and a refreshed space for an existing operator if that's necessary. I believe there was also, and Amy, you gave me the heads up on this, there was also a location issue, and if you look at the location map, that suggested that we may be underservicing the west side of the community as well. So in terms of the physical distribution of the current childcare facilities, that may need to be taken into account. Is that correct, Amy? Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's what I remember from when we were going through the needs assessment.
Yeah.
In terms of population, but where the actual facilities were was a bit of a mismatch.
Yeah. So, and go ahead, Sarah, did you want to jump in? Oh, okay. You're muted now, by the way, so there we go. So I just want council, as we go into Amy's report, which will be coming up on the agenda, this idea in our head that somehow this is public, private, etc. We're just being offered to be a conduit to capitalize a childcare facility, and depending on the nature of the partnerships, that childcare facility does have to add more spaces to the mix, but it doesn't mean that we are actually going to be the childcare operators. So we've got the ability to fund the facility. So keep that in mind when we get into the implementation discussion or the next step discussion. Any other questions for Sarah?
I have one more question, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
Sorry. So you're suggesting that the city as a target should try to hit the 18.4, which is the provincial average. But with all the spaces that the province is creating, that's kind of a moving target. Do you have an estimate of, in 5 years' time, what the average will be in BC if the province does create all the spaces that it's attempting to?
So a couple things come to mind. We know that the province wants to have a universal childcare system, and there is no Canadian standard on what that means. But from what we can see in Quebec, they do have around 50 spaces per 100 children. So, you know, that's obviously, I think that the average will probably continue to increase with the funding that's going to become available. The reason why we suggested the 86 is because we think it's a realistic target based on how much spaces cost and the funding that's available. So it's something that we think is realistic for the city to achieve. We want to set you up for success. But yeah, so in summary, I believe that the average will continue to increase with the way the province is going. But there is, I think it's an election year, so you never know, things may change. That we chose that target because we think it's a realistic one. Does that help? Does that answer?
Yep. So thank you, very much appreciated, and thanks for your work on this. And I look forward to council's discussion later in our meeting about what do we do with it and where do we go from here. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, and have a great night. And again, just wanted to express the honor and privilege it was to work on this project. So thank you, and good luck with your decisions. And if you ever need support, let us know.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Okay, moving on then to our committee reports, reporting out from the Financial Sustainability and Audit Committee as chair. You've got the late agenda item, and there's actually one that was emailed out to you relative to our delegation. So with respect to our April 7th committee meeting, we did have an extensive in-camera meeting. The public portion of that meeting, we did take a look at where we ended up from last year's budget. As you see in the financial statements, as is normal, there's a surplus to the overall budget, but we did note that both snow and RCMP were over the budgeted amounts. And those are normally what we would have come as a bit of a flex budget for us to be able to determine as a council, either by policy or by decision, where we want that money to go, particularly with the RCMP budget. We knew going into 2020 that we were risk managing both snow and RCMP. And if you'll recall, we made a bit of a midstream change in our 2021 and forward budget to change what we believed is a necessary taxation regime so that we wouldn't risk manage that into 2020 and 2021. So we were aware that those two budget items, we were risk managing them. And then the other piece from that is that we had a pretty significant in-camera meeting, as I indicated, taking a look at some options for COVID, and we'll continue that conversation next week. So that's the report from FSAC. With respect to today's FSAC meeting with the auditors, in which most council members were able to attend, we do need a motion. Councillor Runge and Councillor Vic both moved and seconded the approval of the financial statements for the year ending December 31st, 2019. And I need a motion to that effect in an open council meeting. Can I have a motion to accept financial statements? You can put a hand up, you can wave at me, you can yell. Councillor Paul, I see waving. Seconder, Mitch is gone. Okay, I see your electronic hand up, Mitch. So, so Councillor Paul and Councillor Vic. Is anybody opposed? Okay, seeing no opposition. Any questions or comments on my Finance Committee report? Seeing none, we'll move on. Okay. Next are council reports. So we're going to do a quick COVID-19 update. Again, there may be some things in here that may trigger some, discussions of council business. That's not the intent of giving the update. The intent of giving the update is simply so that you get a sense of what's going on. Most items where there's some business issues associated with it, we will be bringing the business forward at some point. So as of last week, I'm trying to find where I put my notes for this. As of last week, Thursday, we did get the flexibility that we wanted for taxation, penalties, timing of our taxes. And so we'll deal with that more substantively when we get to Director Bolton's report and the recommendation that we do delay taxation for this year. And she can outline where we're getting some of that flexibility from. We had a public safety and policing committee meeting, and specifically because there were concerns coming out of our emergency operations center stakeholder meeting, just around where we were with specifically domestic violence, child abuse, what we were seeing out on the streets, and what bylaw was seeing. At the PSP meeting, we got a report from both RCMP and bylaw that on the RCMP side, we now have a fully staffed prolific offenders team that are actively working on where the bulk of our property crime is coming from. And that there's a general feeling of the community being a lot quieter. And that's across the board from the acting staff sergeant across the board, all shifts. The one area that he did raise for us is that because they have a new reporting system, and there was a bit of an early report out, that we need to all be cognizant of the fact that we wait until the actual formal reports that we get are published, because there's a discrepancy between what's reported and what's found to be a founded report or an active file. And so that did cause a little bit of confusion. And so we'll report out in our normal due course and using the proper mechanisms. But in general, the feeling is it's quite quiet. As you know, one of my columns spoke to the 14 or 16 page clarification document we got on what the role of our bylaw officers are. In order to include more members of council on the work of bylaw, we are now giving to the 2 members of our public safety committee the daily bylaw reports that we get, so that a couple members of council are aware of what bylaw is doing. For the most part, bylaw continue to find compliance. There have been a couple of instances where there's been questions about business practices. We've been able to field those questions and go check that out. And again, it has to deal with the public not understanding that non-essential businesses can operate, and not necessarily understanding how businesses are managing social distancing within their own environment. So bylaw does follow up on those when we do get those complaints. And they have a number now to call where if there are issues that, you know, we're unclear about, they've got a resource that they can call and get clarification through the public health office, because that's where the actual regulatory authority is coming from. On the weekend, we did get a report that the Riverfront Trail was busy. We've had a couple of issues around the skateboard park, but other than that, you know, we are tracking as a community along the lines that we should be tracking. We did have, and I'll let the city manager speak to the emergency operations stakeholder roundtable. We did do that. We are giving the MLA bi-weekly updates. And so we had one, I think we've got one for this Thursday. So it's been 2 weeks already, which just seems kind of funky that it's been that much time has passed. So the city manager and I make ourselves available to the MLA to give her any updates. We haven't had the same query from the MP, but we would make ourselves available to the MP as well. And then, of course, you got an email report on the business roundtable and the effectiveness of that. And tomorrow, no, Thursday, we'll be meeting. We had a staff meeting about the social side of a similar type program. We're working on some background on trying to create some kind of clearinghouse or information flow on the social side. And we'll be having a roundtable stakeholder discussion with various organizations in our community on Thursday on that one as well. I think that that's all I've got on the go for reporting, and if you could just give a quick update.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So a couple of just summary items. You will have heard of most of these because we put out press releases or whatnot, or information notices to council. But since the last update, the airport, CMA has shut down their scheduled flights. That's will last for an estimated 2 months, and that's their estimation. But the airport itself is still up and running, and we're maintaining that because it's important for all the other purposes that the airport's out there for. Some other activities, the business hotline is gone live, and they're getting good responses. Amy, I don't know if you have the numbers at the top of your fingertips of the number of calls you put out there. Sorry, I should have told you in advance, but.
I don't know the number of calls that have gone out now. I didn't check that today, but we've connected with 58 businesses as of like 3:30 p.m. today.
Awesome, great. So that thing's up and running, and that is, of course, the city's ECDev department, Community Futures, and the BIAs operating that. The Shop Local program has been re-engaged, and that's led by economic development as well, and there's all kinds of incentives out there. As the mayor mentioned, we started EOC stakeholders meetings. We've had them twice now. The key community stakeholders in there are the city, NHA, the school district, BC Housing, our own emergency services, so police and fire. And recently we actually added First Nations Health Authority as well, a representative from that, the community engagement representative. So it's a good little meeting. And just to be aware of what everyone is going on. The interesting part of the EOC meeting now is that it's kind of has a dual role, with COVID being still front and center, but the flooding response certainly picking up in interest. And as the water levels are coming up, this looks like it could be a year where it's pretty engaged. What else is, a couple of other little items, and sorry, there's no particular order to these. The city's installed 2 outhouses with separate hand washing stations. Those have been established at one at Seal Tingley Park, one at Baker Creek Park. And the goal around those was specifically to try to serve the more homeless populations who don't have access to as many washroom facilities now, with so many businesses being closed. And happy to report that they seem to be operating quite well. We don't have reports of significant vandalism to those. So we're happy to report that. What else? We're going to talk about Billy Barker Days later on being canceled, and that is a direct implication of course, the COVID response. And our bylaw officers are still working to spread the news on social distancing. So far, been pretty good compliance. I think the Riverwalk is one of the challenging areas, and in particular around the Fraser River footbridge there. But they're still out there. We got, of course, have 4 officers on the ground now, and as well, our RCMP officers is fully manned up. So they're all running at full capacity. And I believe that's it. Oh, sorry, one other thing I should mention, because you probably heard about it a little bit. The flooding that we're managing from the EOC, Baker Creek, we've been having issues there with log jams, and we've managed to clear them, but it's an ongoing thing. So it's probably one of the first bits of the flooding you'll see in the city here is logs jamming up either at the bridge or just a little upstream of the bridge. Thank you.
Okay, just a couple of quick things because it's a trigger, and this is an evolving situation for us. We are working with BC Housing on alternate housing. So we've been pushing them a little bit. You'll hear that in the news quite a bit. Right now, they have secured a block of rooms, and that's a combination of individuals who don't have the capacity to socially isolate, plus the potential for some folks that are homeless who need some social isolation space. It's medical, people who are in transit but don't have a place to socially isolate, etc. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, and they are looking at another block of rooms if we need them. We have had a discussion at a senior staff level on the bylaw side as the weather warms up and as people become a bit more cabin fever-ish. Our bylaw currently are pretty fully deployed. And so there is some potential room through EMBC if we need to look at ramping up bylaw that they may cover some costs. Wherever we can, if we're doing incremental service, wherever we can charge that through either PEP or EMBC, staff are very diligent about looking for those opportunities to get those dollars where they are available. So as this situation evolves, we'll just keep evolving, and we'll keep looking for opportunities to have the province pay for when we are actually stepping in and dealing with issues over and above our normal activities. Are there any questions of a general nature just with respect to the COVID update? I see Councillor Rudenberg.
Thank you. So does that include, when you talk about being able to manage the charges, does that include some of the homeless camps that are popping up along the riverfront again?
So again, we still have our normal practice with our rapid response team, and they continue to work with the various agencies. One of the things we have been pretty deliberate about, and I think we should take it as a standard practice, not just a COVID practice, where we're getting pretty tired of people pointing at the city to do something about servicing this client group. We are not mandated nor resourced to service that client group. So even in our emergency operations center discussion and with our Director of Development Services feedback to BC Housing and to the Shelter Society, our mantra has been, you're the resourced agencies, you figure it out. And we will be a willing partner to help you do that, but we're not the lead. So from our perspective, we continue to do our rapid response in decamping people. We still think that that's a best practice and ensures public safety. But when it comes to resourcing those individuals, we're really pushing hard to BC Housing, Mental Health and Addictions, Northern Health, pick up the ball and start resourcing those individuals where they need it.
Thank you.
Okay. Any others? I don't have any hands up. Okay, we'll move on then. The next item, the letter of support for North Cariboo Seniors Council. That's simply an information only to council. We did have a very good meeting today with the executive members of the Seniors Council. Councillor Vic will be bringing some reports back to us as the liaison. What happened was, so the overarching program and the direction to get us to a standalone council for seniors was driven by council. So technically it's the city of Quesnel that has the age-friendly designation, and technically it's council that holds the age-friendly designation and associated supports that come with that. But as part of our strategy, we did want a standalone council for seniors, and we're successful, and the seniors have taken that over. Part of what's going to have to happen, though, that we didn't really think through is that there's going to be a handoff period. There's going to be some back and forth because some of the grants still have to run through us. Some of them still require motions of council. We require the council to get liability insurance and to get some other structures in place so that we can have a normal partnership that we would have with a not-for-profit society. That involves costs. So we got a bunch of grant applications coming to us that had some time sensitivity to it. And in fact, you know, this one had to be done before this council meeting. So we did say yes, it's all fits within strat plan. It's absolutely part of the strategic plan that we're working on, plus previous designations of ACE friendly. So the letter going for support is just an information item, But the other piece that will happen is Councillor Vic will be working with the Seniors Council to bring a report back for City Council to determine what resources we may need to give to the new Seniors Council to get them on a solid footing so that they can actually drive this on their own. So that's just a heads up for you. There's a bit of work going on, and I think the meeting we had today was a very good, productive meeting, and I believe tomorrow the council's board will be meeting, and they'll be able to come back to us with some questions. Councillor Vic, did you want to speak further to this?
I'll just say briefly that I'm really looking forward to sharing with City Council some of the nuts and bolts that the Seniors Council will need to become, like you said, more able to function independently. There's definitely willing participants on that council who are very aggressive and very motivated to keep the ball rolling, and evidence of that are all these grant applications coming in. But obviously, there's still some learning to be done on that council, and things like insurance and whatnot. Those are expensive items, and I'm really thankful for, on their behalf, thankful for the support that the city might be able to offer in the future.
Thank you. And just before I open up for questions, what we wanted to make clear to the Seniors Council today was this has nothing to do with us getting in the way. We want to continue to be enablers of them being as robust an organization as they can and of driving the age-friendly agenda. So it was just that the early hiccup, it may have appeared as if we were putting some roadblocks because some of the grants we actually couldn't support without some due diligence being done around them. So I think that message got clear to them that this is an effort to enable and to accelerate their development. It's not an effort to get in the way at all. So questions? Councillor Rudenberg, you still have your hand up, just so you know. You still do. Okay, no questions? Okay, seeing none, that's an information item only. Let's move into staff reports then. So over to you, Amy. What next?
Okay, so the purpose of this report is to receive direction from council regarding the implementation of the Childcare Action Plan. So as we heard from Sarah, our action plan and inventory completed by SPARC BC shows that we have 15.1 spaces per 100 children compared to the BC average of 18.4 spaces per 100 children. And based on population projections, that'll put us about 86 spaces short, or we need to add 86 spaces to meet the BC average over 5 years. In addition to physical space, I'll just highlight again that one of the big challenges that were identified over and over again as we met with childcare providers was the issue of staffing. Just a low number of ECEs available, and part of that was the time commitment required to achieve the qualification, the low pay that they receive, and then burnout over time because it's such a demanding position. Funding programs are available to encourage new childcare spaces, and that includes the New Spaces Fund. So up to 100% of funding, up to $3 million to build new spaces for projects led by the public sector, up to 90% funding of $1.5 million for new spaces built by nonprofit organizations, and 75% of $250,000 for projects led by private business. We know that the school district is interested in including spaces in the new QJS, and up to 40 new spaces were mentioned at one of our stakeholder meetings. And we've heard from at least 2 other organizations, and today I had a phone call from another agency who was working for an organization in the community who is also interested in knowing more about our action plan and potentially creating new spaces in the community. So there's definitely interest there. And that was covered off in the survey as well, with 1/3 of respondents to the childcare provider survey indicating that they had an intention to expand their programming over the next 2 years. The Quesnel and District Daycare Society is another organization that's indicated an interest in a potential partnership with the city to develop new spaces and replace their existing spaces. They're in an interesting position because they really must replace their existing spaces. So I've been having a conversation with ministry staff about whether that constitutes new spaces because they would otherwise lose their existing spaces, or whether replacing the existing spaces is just replacing existing spaces and only the additional spaces would be eligible for funding. So it seemed to raise an interesting point, and they're looking into that and will get back to me, but I haven't heard back from them yet on that. So the recommendation is that Quesnel City Council provide direction to staff regarding the implementation of the Childcare Action Plan. And I've included some different options on the next page of the report. The second option, I think, just to add to that, I think one of the things that we could do is something really similar to what we're doing with our business hotline, just calling all of our existing childcare providers and seeing how we can leverage all of the different funding programs that are available for childcare in the community. And that could be part of that second option. The third option, to bring forward further information regarding the requirements of a city-led project. I think there's a lot that we need to figure out there. In the guidelines for the New Spaces Fund, I don't know if this is a change or if we missed it before. You can have your building design and business plan, it's an eligible expense, but it also has to be done and submitted with the report, and you can't incur any expenses before submitting the report. So there's definitely a catch-22 there. I didn't really get an answer other than the fact, yep, there's a catch-22 in our guidelines when I made an inquiry. So
yeah, and I think so we've asked the minister on 2 occasions for that clarity, because that is a problem for us. Why would we expend any money prepping up a capital project when it may not be an eligible expense? But they then point to saying, well, it is an eligible expense, and we point to the fact that yes, only if we have an approved project. And as a council, we would never approve a project if we didn't do that due diligence work on the front end. So so that's unresolved. The one thing I would say before I open it up for council for direction, there's a couple questions here, Amy. But first and foremost, council should be aware, and I did report out on one of our COVID updates, at least in the early days of this situation, when we began the self-isolation and the social distancing and the shutdown on our economy. The report we got from the childcare referral resource and referral was that we had capacity, we had childcare capacity for essential service workers and so on. To Councillor Paul's point, I think the question begged, as the economy ramps back up again, if school doesn't ramp back up with it, lockstep, then it does beg a whole bunch of questions around what happens with childcare and whether people become ineligible to go back to work because they don't have childcare because their kids are school age, but they're not in school. And I think if you listen to Dr. Bonnie Henry and some of the statements coming out of the province, they are alive to that issue. That's why the targeted step back is predominantly at the younger age children. And that would be under whatever the legal age is to be able to be at home on your own. In order to try and pick up the slack on that. So to Councillor Paul's earlier point, I think the whole COVID situation has thrown a bit of a wrench into this now for the sort of stepwise coming back to whatever the new normal is. But whether or not it throws a wrench later on with the ability for people to work at home, I think there's a shift in the field here. And so I think even Amy, the phoning out to talk to the current providers about how they see it playing out would be helpful to us as well. So I see Councillor Runge with a hand up.
Thank you, and thanks, Amy. I'm definitely willing to move the report forward. My question actually was to Mayor Simpson's point two comment. If Amy's doing the call outs and things, you know, then I guess I'm always looking at what's the cost plus here right now, given what we don't know about next week yet in our discussions for budget stuff. So I'm a little leery of jumping wholehearted in, even though my heart wants to be there. But I definitely, you know, if we can do it in-house, I think that's a great thing.
So again, Amy, you can speak to that, but there's no indications in here under financial implications, right, of adding consulting fees or anything at this point. Amy?
Yeah, I think for option 2 at this point, it would be staff time. It's I think when we find that time with the hotline and balancing that out with the work that we're doing for COVID stuff, but definitely trying to get some calls out, like you said, Mayor, with what could happen with childcare even in the short term, is maybe something that we need to build into the work that we're doing with the hotline right now.
Yeah, and I think it's a natural fit because we may have some retailers coming back up that actually can't staff up, depending on what's happening on the childcare side as well. I see Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Amy, for this. And it dovetails perfectly into what the other report that we're looking at. I'd like to move option 2. I think it's the direction that we have to go to try and support as much as possible. I'm not sure. I'm hoping that we can be able to help as a city, not just with the grant applications and working Amy and her team with the businesses and how we could move that forward, but also, once again, Bob, just to keep chiming this, with all the challenges in our specific area, I'm hoping that the provincial government's going to be able to help us out. But yeah, the long story short, I'm moving option 2.
Can I have a seconder for option 2? I see Councillor Runge. And the only thing that I would suggest, Amy, given our conversation, that as this option proceeds and as there's more dialogue with the providers, it would be good to roll in that ECE and qualified staff piece, and to make sure we're collecting more data on that so that we can have a robust conversation with CNC and others about how we address some of those recommendations in the report as well. So I see a thumbs up from the mover on that. So any other questions on moving ahead with more data collection at this point?
Can I just,
City Manager?
Amy, I'm just wondering if you could comment on the time that your estimate that will take to do option number 2, and when you would be able to deliver results back to council, because obviously your shop is fairly tied up right now.
That's a good question. I think to do some preliminary call outs, we could do that over the next little while. I think to look into some of the other pieces are going to take some time, and especially working with CNC to talk about adding, and we've already had a little bit of a conversation with them about adding more an additional ECE program that normally runs every 3 years, so moving that up in the rotation and trying to get that to happen more often. Like those things can take a lot more time, but just doing an initial call out and having further discussions with those that have already indicated interest, I think we could do over the next few weeks.
Okay. And to the city manager's point, though, I would suggest that because of the shifting field, your option number 4 of delaying making a decision at this time is embedded in number 2.
Yeah. And
I think we would revisit it once things start to stabilize somewhat, and we can come back and take a look at it. We have talked about it as a strategic initiative, so it's not going to get lost. And I think the direction that the government's on is a direction where potentially they'll get more robust. And Sarah kind of intimated that, more robust in trying to achieve universal childcare in the province, not less. So I think we can continue to do the findings and then wait until an appropriate time. Right?
Yeah, and if I could, Mr. Mayor. So I think your work on making sure that the operators understand what's available to them, that's great work, and you should proceed as fast as possible. But I think that the rest of the program, what's all included in option number 2 here, the rest of that could easily wait until fall till council has, so you have a chance to really do some diligence to it.
Yeah, I think it's just something that you can track as you go along, because you're going to get some intelligence as you go along, and then we just look at a time to roll it up and make sense out of it sometime in the fall.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments from council? Okay, go ahead, Amy.
Yeah. Sorry, I could just see Councillor Paul waving, and I wasn't sure if you could see him.
No, I can't. So, Councillor Paul?
Yes, thank you. And I thank you for your comment that, you know, I'll be voting in favor of option 2, but I know that we will all be sort of watching the fallout from COVID as this thing hopefully moves forward.
Okay. And so that was another instance, Councillor Paul, so you're aware, if you don't use the electronic hands up, you weren't on our screen. So it just happened that Amy saw you waving your hand. Okay.
Well, I thought that because I could see myself on the screen that you could see me. So
No.
now I'm
No.
on the electronic one.
Yeah. We have a weird setup here that we're trying to fix where we can only see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screens at a time. So with staff and others on, it means that I don't always see council. Okay. All right. So anyone in opposition to the motion? Seeing none, thank you for that. And thanks, Amy, for your work on that. Moving on to staff report K2, the Forestry Initiatives Program, Durrell Road Upgrade and Maintenance. Is Aaron on?
I'm here. Can you see me?
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for having me. Can everyone hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. So the purpose of this report is to request a letter of support for the proposed upgrade and maintenance of Durrell Road. So that's the first kilometer to the parking lot. The proposed upgrade and maintenance will be carried out by the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, provided appropriate support for the project is garnered by the various interested parties. So this is a project that crosses between the Forestry Initiatives Program for the city and the Trails Initiative. The proposed upgrade and maintenance to the road is important because the road condition right now is very poor to the parking lot. Currently, Durrell Road corridor is under fuel management prescription development under our Community Wildfire Protection Plan. So it's really a natural fit with upgrading the road. And MOTI wants the timber harvesting that takes place to be done under our Community Wildfire Protection work. The road upgrade will make it easier for our logging trucks coming down the mountain from the parking lot. And like I just explained, the tree clearing will be a natural fit for the permitting that we need for the fuel management. Upgrading and ongoing summer maintenance of this section of road would have a huge impact on the accessibility of Dragon Mountain Provincial Park and expanding the ever popular trail network there. So if I may, I'll move on to the recommendation.
Yep.
That council send a letter to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure in support of the Gold Rush Cycling Club's request for the ministry to upgrade and provide seasonal maintenance to Durrell Road in order to improve access to the parking area for Dragon Mountain Trail Network. And further that, council directs staff to explore options to dovetail the upgrade of Durrell Road with fuel management operations for the planned area.
Okay.
Any questions?
Thank you. Can I have any questions or a motion? Councillor Runge.
Sorry, that was a motion to accept it.
Okay, a motion. Councillor Elliott, are you seconding that then? Yep, okay. Any questions or comments for Aaron? Seeing none. Aaron, I went up there the other day to sort of take a look at this, and the road is in really bad shape. I was surprised at how good a shape the parking lot was, because I was up there in the fall and the parking lot was mud bog. Do you know, has work been done on the parking lot? Do you know?
Yeah, they just did a bunch of work. So that was through the cycling club. Some person named Lawler did the work.
Oh, yeah.
Ian Van Loosten explained it to me. So yeah, it's been upgraded,
Okay.
and we're going to use it as a logging landing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the only question I think there, and maybe Matt Thomas can work on it, is I think ultimately if they do get it stabilized, some of that, the cull material from our road program that we use for our parking lots, if when you work with Modi on this, that would be a stabilizing surface on there too, and they would have similar a lot of waste material, right, that they could potentially use. So something to keep in mind to stable the parking lot. But I was surprised at how good a shape the parking lot was in. The road was blown out, but the parking lot was.
Yeah, it's way better now. Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so on this then, anyone in opposition to the motion? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Okay, next, the Northern Development Initiative Trust grant applications. Lindsay?
Yeah, the purpose of this report is to gain council's approval for the following grant applications. The Community Halls and Recreation Facilities Grant through Northern Development Initiative Trust for the Forestry Innovation Center Improvement Project. The Community Workforce Response Grant under the Community Response Stream through the Ministry of Advanced Education, Skills and Training for the Skilled Labor Program. And the Community Workforce Response Grant under the Community Response Stream through the Ministry of Advanced Education, Skills and Training for the Fuel Management and Trail Design and Maintenance Program. So for the upgrades to the Forestry Innovation Center, the money from this grant will purchase equipment that will help bring the Forestry Initiatives Program to its full potential as an innovative hub. The purchases will include a smart board, dry erase boards, a specialty Canon printer, and an iPad, to name a few. For the skilled labor program, the money from this grant will fund a 15-week program through the College of New Caledonia, which will train 20 participants. The program includes many industry tickets and certifications, a 2-week job placement, as well as personal protective equipment, textbooks, and a training allowance upon completion. And for the Fuel Management and Trail Design and Maintenance Program, the money from this grant will fund a 9-week program through the College of New Caledonia, which will provide training for 12 participants. Participants will complete the program with numerous certifications, industry tickets, and an in-depth knowledge of both fuel management and sustainable trail practices. All participants will receive a training allowance upon completion, personal protective equipment, and textbooks, as well as, oh yeah, I mentioned that, a training allowance upon completion. Are there any questions before I continue with my recommendations?
Questions for Lindsay? I see none.
Okay.
Councillor Paul, are you leaning in?
One moment, I was looking for my little hand. Did my little hand up button come up?
Yes, it did.
Okay, perfect. A question, and that is with regard to the community, with regard to the upgrades for the Forestry Innovation Center. I presume that without the city's contribution, that grant would not happen.
That is correct. Yeah, the Northern Development Initiative Trust, they cover up to 70% of the grant of the project quote.
Yeah, but let's be crystal clear, Councillor Paul. If you look at the recommendation, while it's labeled city contribution, it's actually from another grant that we've got, right?
Yeah, I've got that. Thank you. And I would have voted in favor. I'm going to vote in favor of it anyhow, because 70% off of anything is a good deal. So I'm going to go with it.
Okay, thank you. So go ahead then, Lindsay. I don't have any other hands up. Go ahead. And Councillor Paul, you can just take your hand down now so that there's no confusion. You just have to you have to go back to that same screen and just take your hand off there.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was unmuting.
That's okay. No, but sorry, Ron, just so I don't miss you later on, you have to undo the hand as well. There we go. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Lindsay.
Okay, recommendation number 1, that Quesnel City Council supports the application to Northern Development Initiative Trust's Community Halls and Recreation Facilities Grant for the Forestry Innovation Center Improvements Project for the from the Cariboo Chilcotin Lillooet Regional Development account, and that council approves the use of $7,466.70 out of the Forest Enhancement Society Fund to cover the city's contribution.
So on the first recommendation, Councillor Vic, I see, and Councillor Rudenberg. Any comments? Anyone in opposition? Seeing none, that has passed. And Lindsay, council have this in front of them, so I don't think we need to get into the actual, if you just say recommendation 2 and then which fund it's about, that way you don't have to read all of the verbiage, okay?
Okay. Recommendation number 2, that Quesnel City Council supports the application for the fuel management and trail design and maintenance program for
Perfect.
the. Okay.
That's all you need to do for us.
Okay.
Okay, because the written recommendation is what will go into the motion. So it just keeps it clear as to which program is all we really need to do. So on that program recommendation 2, can I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Goulet, I see. Councillor Runge. Any questions or comments? Councillor Elliott, I see you've got a hand up, but I think that was for the motion. Okay, anyone in opposition? Seeing none, thank you. Okay, and the final one?
That Quesnel City Council supports the application for the skilled labor program.
Okay, motion. Councillor Rudenberg, I see. Councillor Runge. Any questions or comments? Any in opposition? Okay, Lindsay, thank you very much for that. Aaron, if you're still on?
No.
Aaron's left. Okay, so it's unfortunate. I should have asked Aaron to stay. I want council to know that the 2 community workforce programs are pretty significant for us. This is something coming out of this ministry that the ministry is just excited about as we are to be able to deliver the program. And it was really interesting for us because if you'll recall, our last Future Forestry Think Tank symposium was about workforce preparation and workforce adjustment. And we had quite a bit of pushback from some of our licensees and some others about why we were starting to move into workforce development. They didn't get it. We have some of the strongest proponents now of us moving on with this are coming from those same licensees. So there was a bit of a lag time with them understanding you don't develop a workforce overnight. It takes time. You have to be very deliberate. And so the Ministry of Advanced Education is, as I said, quite excited that we had the capacity for them to flow these dollars through us and get these programs up and running. So I think kudos to our staff that we're leading the way on these kinds of programs. Thanks, Lindsay. Appreciate your time here. Okay, next, so Director Bolton. So with Director Bolton's report, I'm going to ask Director Bolton to start from the end of her report and work backwards. Sure. Because the end of Director Bolton's report is the synopsis of what happened last Thursday that gives us the latitude to then consider the recommendation that's being put in front of council.
So sure, the province made some announcements that really make us have the ability to delay our tax due date. So the announcements were school tax has been reduced for the commercial classes. That doesn't really affect us, but that's just for everyone to know. The city does not have to remit school tax until the end of the year. So normally we have to remit that 5 days after the tax due date. So by doing that, we just have some more cash flow available. The tax penalty date for commercial classes is set at October 1st. So the province is setting that date, not allowing the municipalities to do it. Local governments can borrow interest-free from their existing capital reserves to help pay for operating expenses. This one really helps us out because normally we cannot use our capital reserves for any of the operating expenses. So that forces us to borrow funds when we actually have cash sitting in our capital reserves. Local governments can carry debt for an additional year. So if for whatever reason we do need to get a revenue anticipation bylaw, we're allowed to have it for 1 more year than normal. And then they've just delayed some of our reporting due dates that we have to do.
So just for clarification, because I was on the call and then there was a press release and everything issued. So a couple of things that are a bit more nuanced than the bullets. The province targeted only the commercial classes. did not target residential and was very specific that they believed that a robust enough set of programs existed on the residential side. And the presumption, of course, is the individuals who are paying residential taxes own real property. And if they're seniors, they have deferral programs that already exist. There are other tax deferral programs that exist, and that both the federal and provincial governments were coming in with support programs either through their CERB or through the wage subsidy program for business. So the entire provincial sort of focus was on the commercial classes for relief. And the decision you have in front of you is to actually give the delay to all classes and just align all classes together. From a tax collection perspective, it would be just weird for us to try and collect residential first and then commercial, etc. But just so you're aware, the minister was very explicit. Their targeted relief was at the commercial classes. Second point to note in here is the school tax relief that the government, provincial government is giving was explicitly designed, and the minister stated as such, to prevent what we're seeing around the province, where municipalities are giving across the board tax relief, going back on their operating budgets, everything else. That they were actually creating some space by giving almost 75% relief on school taxes, and they set a target for about 25% on average of total relief on property taxation. And the minister again stated explicitly that's where they believe the target should be. They were providing that relief, so municipalities who didn't necessarily have the same capacity to provide relief knew that that relief was being provided by them. The other thing to keep in mind, and you'll see in here, they did not deal with regional districts the same way. And so we will have to pay the regional district their allocation on time. And the regional district is proceeding with their budget as it was pre-COVID. And that we have to pay, you know, MFA, BC assessment, etc. So they didn't give us relief on us paying up, with the exception of school tax. But that's a bit of a moot point if people collect their tax late, because they're not collecting that money until later in the year anyway. So, you know, they made a big deal that somehow, you know, if you go on a July 2nd and you collect school taxes, yeah, then you get to hold that money until the end of the year. But if you delay your taxes, then the longer you delay your taxes, the less you're getting some relief from that school tax. So it was a very interesting, it was on the conference call, it was the first time that she didn't invite a Q&A. She just had her and her staff step through what they were doing. And she did indicate, and subsequent to our conference call, the Minister of Finance indicated they regard this as the first step in helping communities. We don't know what step 2 looks like, but they certainly said on the conference call they get that we're all suffering revenue loss, and that we all will have transition issues and other residual issues related to this. So, so it was, you know, they indicated that they got our pain and that this was step 1 in allowing us some flexibility. So let's deal with any questions just around the sort of the provincial announcement before we get into, okay, so as a consequence of that, we can do X. Any questions around the provincial announcement and what latitude it gives us? Councillor Paul?
Yes, thank you. I just want to inquire about tax notices. I mean, if we adopt our budget May 19, would the tax notices go out as usual in the same time frame?
As I note in this report, we've delayed printing our pre-formatted notices to wait to see what the due date is, because that's actually stamped on them. So we are going to be a couple of weeks later than normal. So it'll be probably the last week of May that the notices will go out.
Thank you.
But the notices would still go out this spring, yeah, but they would have the stamp date for later. I see Councillor Vic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You asked for questions about the government response.
Yeah.
So my question is regarding the school tax. You said it's what's the percentage relief for commercial? 75%, is that what you said?
Well, no, I mean, they dropped it. Carrie knows the numbers better than I do. They've got a target that they're aiming for.
Yeah, so they've dropped the mill rate a couple times, but what it works out for our commercial businesses, it was under 10%. So on an average for the province, they put out that it's 25%, but for businesses in Quesnel, it'll be just under 10%.
So 10% of
your total tax bill.
Of your total tax bill. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, and that's a function of our industrial rate being so high, right?
It's a function of our mill rates for the business class being higher.
Being higher.
Yeah.
Than the provincial average.
Yeah.
Okay. But on a cash basis, it'll be 10% of their total property tax bill. Okay. Any other questions just from the government's move? Okay, I see none. So Carrie can lead us through what the proposal is then that we can do as a result of that.
Sure. So the purpose of the report was to just discuss the city's property due date in light of COVID and various supports. So normally we collect taxes July 2nd with our 10% penalty the day after, July 3rd. But under the charter, we can adopt an alternative municipal taxation scheme. So since the province has released the fact that the penalties for commercial properties would be postponed to October 1st, 2020 to give business and landlords time to pay the reduced property tax without penalty, it makes sense to do that for all our classes, just to provide for consistency and ease of collection. So staff is recommending that we set the due date for all classes at September 30th with the 10% penalty applicable on October 1st. And because we'll be able to borrow from our reserves, we can make it till September. And then once council determines the due date, staff will begin the process of printing the property tax notices once the property tax rates are also set on the second May council meeting. So the recommendation is that council approves the municipal tax due date of September 30th, 2020 for 2020 with the 10% penalty to be applied October 1st, 2020, and for this alternative municipal taxation collection scheme to be built into the tax rate bylaw.
Okay. Councillor Runge, are you moving? Councillor Vic, second. Okay. Questions or comments? I see none on the side here. Councillor Vic? Nope. Yep. Nope. Yep.
Yep. Correct. Thank you. Sorry, Carrie or Director Bolton, you said, are we going to mail the tax notices out a couple weeks late? Is that what you said?
A couple weeks later than normal. So they'll come out the end of the May instead of mid-May.
Okay. So if people feel like paying them in June or July, they can, but they'll have till the end of September.
I expect a lot of people will likely still pay on time. Mortgages are set up to pay at that point. You know, it'll be interesting to see what cash flow ends up being.
Well, that could reduce the burden we face and our reliance on reserves to keep the city moving.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anybody else? Seeing none on the motion. Anyone in opposition? Seeing none, that motion has passed. And I wonder if we could do just a quick press release tomorrow so that we give everybody advance notice, right? And then we can work on the tax notice. Right? Okay.
Yeah, good idea.
Okay. Then next, moving on to the bylaw. So I'm going to ask Ms. Albers to speak to. Oh, sorry, my mistake. Correspondence. So again, this is just for receipt, but you'll note that we did get a letter from Billy Barker Day Society that Billy Barker Days will be canceled. And as embedded in the letter, and if you've been paying attention to Dr. Bonnie Henry, she said a number of times that it will be quite some time before we get back to them lifting their 50-person limit on meetings. I believe Island Mountain Arts have canceled Arts Wells. I think Councillor Elliott, you gave me a heads up on that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's not coming out until a later date.
Okay. Okay. My apologies if I let the cat out of the bag on that one. We're expecting, you know, basically, I know some of my competition events are canceled right through the end of September. And I think that's the path that we're on. Just for council's edification, there will be a discussion at executive about alternatives for Canada Day, whether or not we can use some of the resources we've got put aside for Canada Day to facilitate some kind of maiden Quesnel electronic thing or something. So we'll have a conversation about Canada Day, but I think that'll be our first near-term desire for people to congregate, and we'll have to just deal with that. Any other questions or comments on that? So can I have a motion just to receive the letter then? Councillor Runge, I see. Councillor Goulet. Any in opposition? Okay. And then with respect to the bylaw, just have Ms. Albers just review the issue of notice.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to update council that the April 5th and 15th newspaper advertisements did not occur. However, all legal requirements for public notice were met as council passed a resolution for alternate means of public notice at the March 31st council meeting. So I just wanted to make council aware of that, and I'm still recommending that we proceed with final adoption.
Okay. Can I have a motion of for final adoption? Councillor Rudenberg, I see. Councillor Runge. Any questions or comments? Anyone in opposition? Okay, seeing none. No. So as we indicated at the Finance Committee meeting, and Councillor Goulet, you would be the only one that would know that, we are looking for a special closed council meeting for next Tuesday, so you'll be canvassed on that, and if you could respond in a timely manner so we can get that booked. No changes to committee appointments. Announcement, future events. There are none for the foreseeable future. Gallery questions. I believe we have press on. If they don't unmute in 30 seconds, we're gone. Okay, I don't hear anybody clamoring for that. So can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Councillor Runge, I see. Councillor Vic. Anyone in opposition? Thank you all. Appreciate it very much. Stay safe and stay ISO.
That one a little